So I'll tell you about the universal basic income, but I think Andrew Yang goes off the rails, and he goes off the rails at a place that people wouldn't expect. And that is at coming at this saying he's a businessman, he understands how these things work, and he can make the government more efficient, we can do things right. And that's always a non-starter. It's a non-starter because our government wasn't designed to be efficient. It was actually designed to be inefficient. And the reason it was designed to be inefficient is so that a majority of the population can't run roughshod over a minority, that it's difficult to get things done and there has to be a give and a take. That's very unlike what happens in business. So to the extent that someone brings along, all well-meaning, and of course it makes sense that you would want to bring efficiency to government, you actually end up, if you're unsuccessful, or if you're successful, you end up with a worse government because now you've got one that is good at doing what it does, which is bad news for any minority population. Putting that aside, let's talk about the UBI, Universal Basic Income. The idea here is that everybody pays X percent of their income into a pot, and from this pot, everybody receives a check for the same amount of money. So for example, I'm just going to pick numbers out of the air. You pay 10% of your income. I pay 10% of my income into this pot. If you earn a lot of money, you're paying more because you're paying 10% of a larger number.
Yeah.
I make a little bit of income. I'm paying less, 10% of a smaller number. But we each get a check for $1,000. And the idea is that that check is supposed to cover basic things, right? Now, I think UBI is a good idea and a dangerous idea. It's a good idea if you can replace everything we currently do to help the poor. So think about income assistance, housing subsidies. I would even go so far as to say things like minimum wage, Social Security, Medicare, all of it. Absolutely everything we do to help people, replace it with the UBI. And if you can say rightly so, $1,000 a month isn't enough to make up for that. Well, fine. We'll jack up the numbers then. Let's say $5,000 a month.
Yeah.
Of course, you're going to have to increase the percentage we pay in, but these things work out. The benefit you get from doing this is there are all sorts of odd interactions that occur. You think of it like this. When a physician prescribes drugs to someone who's sick, they have to be very careful if they're prescribing multiple drugs because multiple drugs can interact in ways that they didn't intend, and bad things can happen. The same thing is true for economic policies. So we can say something like, well, we want a policy in place that helps people who don't have much income. We call that income assistance. Or we will have another policy in place that helps people to afford housing. We call this housing subsidies. And these things they're separate programs, but they can interact in ways that cause outcomes that are actually bad, that we didn't intend. It's an interaction. So one of the benefits of a UBI is it takes all those bad interactions off the table because all that stuff is gone. Everybody gets a check for $5,000, period, and off you go. That's the good side of UBI. The downside of UBI is a practical one, and that is there is no way that I can see politically that we would institute a UBI in place of all of these things.
Yeah.
What would happen is if we got to the point that UBI had enough support amongst the voters, politicians would step in and say, well, okay, we'll have UBI, but we won't take away this program or that program. And why are they saying that? Because this program or that program benefits people who vote for the politician,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
And so then you end up with a situation where we have all of the programs we currently have with UBI on top of it. And that's worse. In fact, if you do the math, something like that would end up looking like Social Security all over again, the same magnitude. So people may know that the Social Security Board of Trustees itself says that Social Security will be insolvent in the next 10, 15 years. Well, imagine creating another program of that magnitude that's going to be insolvent for all the same reasons Social Security is insolvent, right? And now you've just doubled your problems.